I apologize, I was on mute, but good afternoon and welcome to another session of Vertex Technopreneur Webinar Series. Today's is the number 7th in the series. For those who are new to the series, the Technopreneur Webinar picks topics that we hope could guide aspiring technopreneurs like yourself through your startup journey. And we pick topics like business conception, fundraising, term sheet negotiation, what is fair, what is reasonable. We also talk about expansion, growth issues and how you can resolve them. And eventually we also talk about exit. Some admin details. This session is recorded. So what that means is that you will be able to see a summary of the recording or the session. And the second thing is that if you have a technical problem, it's likely to be a device issue. We recommend that you log out and log in with another device. I assure you it's working because we have many people that have already signed in. If you have questions and we like questions, please press the button, the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and text your questions to us. And lastly, we love your feedback and it will only help improve our future sessions. Okay, and just a reminder, today's session is making sense of artificial intelligence. And just to be clear, we're not going through the nuts and bolts of what AI is. You can get that from Wikipedia and other resources. Today's session is more about setting the right expectations for using AI in your startup. And more importantly, is sharing also our best practices, things that we have learned as an investor in AI companies, and also things that we have learned from founders of AI startups that we have backed. So now let me introduce the speakers. So we have 3 very good speakers, 2 very young and good-looking folks from our Vertex Southeast Asia and India Fund, Dyota and Kanika, and a third speaker who looks slightly worn but still distinguished looking. He's a founder, Ravi, and so let me introduce them individually. First, Dyota. Dyota has been on both sides of the table. He has been an entrepreneur like you. Before he joined the dark side, he joined Vertex as a VC, and he's now based in Jakarta. Our second speaker is Kanika. He was helping to make the world a better place with IFC, part of the World Bank Group. And he saw the light and he joined Vertex. And now she can do even more good helping entrepreneurs such as yourself. And Kanika is with our Vertex Southeast Asia and India Fund, and she's based in Bangalore. And lastly, Ravi Shankar. Ravi is a successful banker before he decided to plunge into the world of startups. He did not 1, but 4 startups. He's the CEO of Active.Ai, and he will share his journey in building an AI startup with you later on. For myself, my name is Hock Chuan. I am a managing director of Vertex Growth Fund. We are the number 6 fund in the Vertex Group family of funds. And before we start, this is almost an obligatory commercial plug for Vertex. But the reason I wanted to show this slide is to show that this is a space that we have invested in. We have invested in companies that apply AI to provide services. And we have also invested upstream into hardware companies that help accelerate computation and provision of AI services. And with that, let me hand over to Dyota to begin today's webinar.
Thanks so much, Hock Chuan. Good afternoon, everyone. So in today's session, we will go through the following topics, as you can see on the screen. So first of all, what do we know about AI today? So even though we won't go into the nuts and bolts and details, as Hock Chuan mentioned, I think it's good to go through the basics so that everyone is on the same page, right? We will then talk about how to evaluate the right AI approach for your business and the best practices for implementing AI. And last but not least, we'll have a chat with our founder, Ravi, he is a co-founder of and CEO of Active.Ai, and we'll have our Q&A session. Next slide, please. Oh, yeah. So I'm still seeing the making sense of artificial intelligence slide, so not the poll. Okay, so in your opinion, so before we get into the content, we want to do a quick poll, right? So in your opinion, which of these things can AI do well or proficiently today? So you can pick more than one option. And if you can go ahead, take a few seconds to pick them, we'll quickly review them in a couple of seconds. Yeah. So can it write a book? Can it drive a car without supervision? Can it detect fraud? Can it hold an intelligent conversation? Voila. If everyone sees the output screen, you can see that there's a wide amount of variety of answers, right? And truth be told, when you look at AI, it's developing at breakneck speed, right? And the truth is, it's only a matter of time before AI can do all of the above well. So over the past few months, if you read the regular news, we've seen a person being fined while falling asleep in a Tesla, while driving on autopilot. We've seen the development of GPT-3 and its licensing and sale to Microsoft. And essentially, over the next few minutes, we'll try to break things down simply and share with you how we see things in AI. So in the next section, before handing it over to my colleague, Kanika, I'd like to go over three things. So first of all, the definition and the types of machine learning algorithms, so basics, right? Second thing is the factors that drive AI advancement. And lastly, what AI can or cannot do well today, which is relevant to the first poll. So definitions. So I'd like to go through these basic definitions. And as you can see on the screen, the terms that I'm about to say or you've used or even heard of in presentations and meetings, right? And there's a strong relationship between artificial intelligence, machine learning, and deep learning in a sense that they are a subset of one another. So if you look at the large circle, artificial intelligence is defined as a computer system that is able to perform tasks normally requiring human intelligence, right? Whereas machine learning is a subset of AI, which is the algorithm or statistical models and statistical models that computer systems use to perform specific tasks without using with explicit instructions, relying on patterns and inference instead. And deep learning is a subset of both AI and ML. It's a class of machine learning algorithm that uses multiple layers to progressively extract higher level features from raw input. So deep learning is used to find solutions that are complex that even we don't see or understand the logic. So for example, it's used to detect breast cancer using mammography. And referring to the previous poll, it's also used for self-driving cars. Now, though there are many types of machine learning algorithms, right? We see these four main types of algorithms frequently used or are frequently pitched to us, right? So first of all is supervised learning, which is an algorithm that trains with sample input data and desired output. Sometimes you hear them as input-output pairs. And the algorithm uses the output given by the developer or the teacher to optimize a rule. So in short, this algorithm tries to predict an answer. Now, two main problems that supervised learning can solve or are used for is, first of all, regression, which is used to predict continuous value. So for example, it can be used to value a property, right? Either a property that we don't know the value of using parameters and features of houses or properties in similar locations, similar features, or it can even predict future data. The other problem that it can solve is classification, which is used to attempt to draw some conclusion from observed values. So for example, is an email that you received spam or not? So the next type of machine learning algorithm that we'll quickly go through is unsupervised learning, which is an algorithm that trains the machine to find patterns, both visible or invisible for humans without human supervision, right? So it tries to find or look for undetected patterns in a data set with no pre-existing labels and with minimum human supervision, right? So the two main problems that this kind of machine learning algorithm solve is clustering, which means the machine learning algorithm collects objects on the basis of similarity or dissimilarity between them. So for example, this is typically used to characterize or discover new customer segments. The other thing is it's used for anomaly detection, right? So which is to identify rare events that differ significantly from the majority of the data. So you can think about identifying financial fraud or structural damage in a certain production line, or even medical issues. The next machine learning algorithm is reinforcement learning, which is a machine learning algorithm that learns via feedback in terms of rewards and punishment. So the algorithm, or in this case, a term called agent is used, learns iteratively from environment and optimizes its actions using feedback, determining the ideal behavior for that specific context to maximize its own performance. And last but not least, semi-supervised learning, which is used to estimate a correct answer. So this is done through a combination of small amounts of labeled data with large amounts of unlabeled data during training. So this is used when data is expensive to label or very difficult to get. For example, text, audio, and visual data. So AI is able to perform well and will continue to improve its performance because of the three main factors you see on the screen. So first of all, large amounts of data, large volumes of data. Second thing is better and large in processing power and storage to run those algorithms. And last but not least is more advanced research and tools. So just to give you an example of one of the factors, which is data, right? We've seen data expand exponentially in terms of volume, which is the depth of data, the amount of data that we have or we collect. The second thing is the variety or the breadth of data, the different kinds of data that is available to us. And last but not least is the velocity of which data is created, the speed of which data is created. So this data availability expansion enables us to train and build AI solutions better and exponentially increase AI adoption and the accuracy of the AI. So finally, right, what can AI can or cannot do well today? The first question, the first poll that we answered. So as we've seen, the answers varies, right? We saw a wide range of answers from the 4 options that we provided. And the fact is, AI is already applied for all of the problems stated, right? AI is able to perform at various levels of proficiency in all those problems. So instead of listing down the things that AI can or cannot do well today, we'll just provide some kind of like high-level characteristics and criteria of problems that AI can or cannot solve well today. So first of all, AI is able to perform simple and well-defined tasks as good as, if not better than human beings, right? So as long as it's simple, well-defined, it can do it. However, once you do not give it context, once it is complex, once it requires creativity or judgment, that is something that AI can still improve on. The second thing is AI can find patterns in data that are both visible and invisible to us. However, once it finds those patterns, it cannot explain how they got it, or it cannot explain what it means beyond what is already labeled and inputted. Lastly, it can improve on performing tasks when data is abundant and well labeled. So if you have small amounts of data or the data is unlabeled, the AI will not perform as well. And that's it from me. Over to you, Kanika.
Thanks, Dyota, and hi, everyone. So now that Dyota has taken us through the basics of technology, we can spend some time on how to think about building AI for your startup. So let's start with a fundamental question. It should be popping up on your screen right now, which is that as a founder, how should you think about creating your AI product or your AI stack? You can choose any of the options, which are building from scratch, buying existing tools or APIs, or outsourcing to third-party service providers. All right, answers should be coming up now. Right, so as we can see, Most people have picked buying existing tools and frameworks, but some people have also picked the other options. We can actually spend a minute on all three of them in the next slide because all of them have their pros and cons. So building from scratch as a founder is very exciting, but it does take time and it requires a very strong tech and analytical team. Buying, which actually means leveraging existing frameworks, helps reduce your time to market, but then where is the differentiation? And outsourcing means divulging your IP to a third party, which is not always a great option. So what can we do? Based on our discussions with founders and startups, we found that actually buying or using existing tools is probably an efficient way to start building your AI stack. And of course, after that, you can always build more. The reason is that there are today fairly sophisticated deep learning frameworks available. And we found that if you start with an established infrastructure, and if you base your problem on something which has been solved for and proven, it helps reduce your time to market. We've also seen, as we come to the next slide, that a lot of these tools can be used in conjunction with each other. For example, there's PyTorch and TensorFlow, which are today extremely widely used and are very comprehensive deep learning frameworks available. There's also Caffe, which is built for more speed and modularity. Then on top of these, you have neural network libraries, for example, Keras or Scikit-learn or Theano, and these can help provide access to a wide variety of algorithms. And of course, there are tools like Kubernetes, which can help you deploy and scale containerized solutions faster. So with all these options available, it's best to leverage what's available in the market. Now let's come to another question, and maybe Ravi can also later talk about his experience, which is that besides technology, what are the other difficulties you've faced while implementing AI in your startup? And here also, you can pick more than one option. Fairly challenging questions. So let's see what the results have to show. Right. Pretty even spread. So finding the right talent and data availability seems to be the most pressing problems, but the others are fairly significant as well. So we thought that in context of these challenges, how can a young entrepreneur think about building their AI startup? And this is how really we think about it. So the first question needs to be is to really understand your problem and to figure out if your problem can be solved using data. Not all problems can be. And only if the answer to the first question is yes, you should start building your product. The next question will be, how do you define the success of your product? And here we think that the objectives need to be defined in a very clear and concise manner. And thirdly, the question is, how much time and money do you really spend on the solution? And here again, we think that this is linked to your business need. So for example, if your product is a core AI product, like a conversational bot, the answer will be very different versus if AI is one of the many things you need to build your product. For example, in a fintech business, you will use AI in your credit score evaluation product, but then you also need to build the consumer-facing app. You also need to build the collection mechanism. So there, the time and the resources spent will maybe be less as compared to a conversational bot. So once you've understood the problem, the next question is on data. As an AI startup, you cannot start building unless you have access to relevant and high quality data. And really, it's so fundamental that the quality of your output will depend on the quality of your input data characteristics. Another point to keep in mind is that you need multiple data sets for training, testing, and validating your model. And we found that it is often expensive and time consuming to create your own data. A classic example here is in the case of AI for medical diagnostics. Here we've seen that data actually resides with hospitals and clinics. And unless you can get a lot of this data and get continuous access to it, it doesn't really make sense to build a solution. The third step then is to figure out what's already out there in the market, which can help you get to a working solution faster. We discussed this a little bit previously as well. There are multiple tools and frameworks available. And we found that if you can reduce your problem to start with to something which has been solved before, which developers are familiar with, it becomes easier to do a deeper dive and come to a working solution faster. And finally, when you have all these building blocks, we think it makes sense to start small and iterate. What this means is that it's best to come to a pilot first and compare the results of the pilot to the metrics you had defined in the first step. And only if the pilot is making sense, you should move forward. We also think that problems like deployment limitations can be solved later. It's first important to come to a robust working solution. And then finally, on the next slide, because the word data keeps coming up in our discussions, we thought we'd spend a couple of minutes there. Next slide, please. So as an AI startup, data is definitely your most valuable and proprietary asset. You can't do without it. The more data you have, the better data you have, and the more accurate data you have, the more robust your solution will be. But to keep in mind that data is relevant only if it's representative of a large number of common business scenarios you're building for, which means to say that the narrowness and variance or the accuracy in data should not come at the cost of eliminating certain scenarios altogether. Also, as an AI startup, there is nothing called 100% accuracy. So that is a risk which you will have to learn to deal with and learn to live with. And finally, because you need distinct data sets, contamination between data sets can be catastrophic. So your training and testing data sets need to be completely separate. And continuous access to data is almost like a lifeline for your startup. So the importance of this cannot be understated. That's it from my side. I'll hand it over back to Hock, Chuan, and Ravi for their discussion.
Thank you, Kanika. We've come to the end of the first part of our webinar. I would then now ask Ravi to continue the second part of our presentation. Thank you, Ravi.
Thank you, Team Vertex, and good day to everyone. Can we move to the next slide, please? All right. So we started in 2015 when we were looking at the landscape of what could potentially change the way customers engaged with their financial institutions. As a background, the entire team at Active.Ai has spent a lot of time in financial services. Most of us who are building this from the management team have spent between 15 and 20 years living this life of building tech for finance. And we were very intrigued by a lot of data points which started emerging in 2014, 2015, as we saw the world moving to completely unstructured communications, right? This is very different from the way you use your website. This is very, very different from the way you use your apps, where it's almost like point and click and it's just directed. Here, customers were speaking, they were saying things, they were making gestures on medium and platforms which were not traditional to how you engaged with your consumers. So messaging came out in a very big way. There were, Instagrams, there's Facebook, there was WhatsApp, there was WeChat, and a whole bunch of platforms which were regional, some global, in various formats. So when we looked at the problem, we said, hey, at some stage, this is going to come into financial services because customers are growing up on a new media of exchange. So how are we going to help institutions engage with customers with unstructured data? So fundamentally, the problem statement we were tackling with was the rails of business are evolving and changing very rapidly. Data in this business is going to be very different. None of these medium actually have this data. So how is that going to play out? On the other side, if we looked at how financial institutions, largely banks, and I take examples of banks, it's easier to start with. We're looking at this problem statement. Most of them were saying, this is very exciting. We're seeing that we need to be where our customers are. But hey, I have 20, 25 years of legacy. How am I going to go and meet this data with the stack or with a platform or with an idea where I can make sense of this data or what the customer is saying and be proactive. So a very interesting melting point moment. We saw this in 2015, 16, a very exciting time for us actually to take the plunge. And it's been a very fascinating journey from there. Shall we move to the next slide? So, cut back to today. This is a very recent slide from McKinsey and the Financial Brand. It talks about how a bank should actually look like into the future. Because today it's much easier to put a model to say, hey, you should build a bank on data. You should build a bank on blockchain base, on microservices. You should build a bank which is convenient and can be in any form and shape to any medium where you want to interact. Basically saying banking should become invisible. This is great, but there's no bank on this planet today in 2020 which actually has this architecture. So you have an aspiration that is coming from saying everything is changing in the world except banking, and banking should change, but there's so much of legacy. On the other hand, you have billions of data points which are pouring in as you interact with your customers, but nowhere to meet it. So this was a very, very exciting point for us, something that we saw very early in 2015. And it's been a journey for us between 2016, when we formed the company, till 20, to say, how do we get to this meeting point? What does it take to get here? What does it take from a data perspective, from a platform perspective, from an AI perspective, and from infrastructure perspective, and also from a regulatory framework perspective? Can we go to the next slide? So today we can say, after 5 years or so on being on the road, 4 years or so on being on this road, that we practically pioneered the concept of conversational banking as a service, a platform which allows you to understand from millions of data points, from millions of utterances of customers to say what they want from the bank. When a customer is interacting with you on an app, he says very little. He's actually just click and point. But when a customer is talking to his car and say, hey, can you pay for my gas at this gas station? It's a very different conversation. And these are meeting very rapidly today. When we have a conversation with Alexa at home and say, hey, Alexa, how much did I spend on groceries this month? We're asking questions because we want to know answers for these. And Alexa has to pass this to your bank. Your bank has to make sense of this and give you a response. So conversational banking as a service, which is an evolution of one of the largest data sets of data that we built over a 4-year period on banking. We pre-built a lot of the AI, considering that there was no methodology to put this together when we started. So we had to write a lot of these algorithms and make it, baked in a consumption manner where it's almost like zero code. You're just using it as a product. It, came out into a platform today which is almost no code, low code, click and tell, right? And allows you to pretty much interact with customers anywhere in the world. It looks easy today. It would have been much easier for us if we had started in 2018 when a lot of evolution was happening. But when we started in 2016, we had to do the heavy lifting. And the heavy lifting, both in terms of data and in terms of the AI algorithms. Today, it's all in a box, it's easy to consume, and it's made available to the entire banking ecosystem in a consumable manner. So let's take a look at how our journey went through, because it looks easy today. It looks interesting, but this is our story, right? So the first pilot happened because there was a customer who said, I believe that I'll have more customers interacting with me on WhatsApp than they will be with me on my app. And that was very interesting. And he said, look at WeChat, look at Alipay, and look at what everybody else is talking about online, right? So it was a very interesting conversation. We said, true, but where are we going to start, right? So we started with the problem. We didn't start with AI, mind you. we didn't start with also data. We started with a very simple problem statement that if a customer says, how much do I have? Instead of asking, do I have, what is my balance? He says, how much do I have? How do I interpret it? It does not matter where it comes from, right? So with that problem statement, we began our journey and we started collecting data as to how customers will interact and make utterances. And today we can proudly say it's been a long journey, but it's one of the largest data models in the world that we have. And that's the core strength of what we do. And we started with one institution in India, one institution in Singapore. And that journey has also gone through many iterative processes. We've gone through 4 versions of our platform. We have broken it down many, many times and rewritten it back. And today we have our own AI platform, our algorithms, and a fantastic data set, which has morphed itself from moving from a platform which is on-prem to a SaaS model, which is global, addressing multiple languages, 200 plus use cases out of the box, serving millions of customers in a month, handling innumerable utterances, but again, at not 100% accuracy. We are still learning. So we are at about between 90 to 93% for some of our older customers. So we know that there is a point where we are reaching also some challenges and we have to reinvent ourselves. So that'll be version 4 as we see. And there's a lot of development happening globally, which we can borrow from. And in the course of our evolution, we've seen competition from just a few players to a whole bunch of ecosystem players jumping in on top of building their own AI, on top of open source AI, on top of things which are not even AI at all. So, so it's been a great experience. It's exciting to see that, you know, the industry is evolving this fast. The way we look at it is, this is a sign that the market is really massive. And this is a sign that is going to push the entire industry to change, right? And it's a good time to be here. Can we go to the next slide, please? So, where we are today and what we look forward to in the future is that, you know, every second word in the world that you see today is fintech, right? It's almost like, it's almost like AI and fintech is the only thing that's happening. It's what amuses a lot of us. I think it's a means to an end. But the guys who are going to really drive AI are pretty much out there, and the names are out there for you guys to see. There are more specialized players as well. But all of them are interested in financials because they want to take them to the cloud. They want to help them use all the computing power. They want, of course, their interest is on the data. All the big guys want this data. All the banks and financials do not want to give them the data. So there is a scope for players like us to exist, and that is why we survive, that is why we thrive, and that is why we build a platform for people who don't want to share all the data. There are customers who collaborate with big tech, but very limited, and I think that will continue to be the way forward. Banks are buying AI teams and AI companies, and this is going to be the future. This is a given. Open banking is talked about, and there's a lot of initiatives. Singapore is a massive example of global API, open banking hub. It's not about open banking alone. It's about bringing the best models into Singapore. It's a great study, and it's just about begun. And the most exciting thing for players like us, it's unprecedented transformation that we've seen because of the pandemic. People are looking to be where their customers are. There are more customers today outside apps. Apps discovery is becoming very tough. Super apps are in, messaging apps are in, and their adoption is very high. Being there with the customer is most important, and so it has worked very well for financial services, and especially players like us who are in this space. And all our competitors have done remarkably well. So it's a very secular trend that we are seeing in the market. All right. So that kind of sums up where we're looking forward to, and open for questions. Thank you, Tom.
No, thank you, Ravi. Thank you. We're now in our Q&A segment, but and let me pick up the first question. And the first question came from Niraj and Asha, and the question is really. I'm going to paraphrase the question, but I think the theme of the question is really in a very crowded space like AI, right? And where the tools and the framework and even the data are generally available. How would you differentiate? I mean, if you are not starting a new startup now, Ravi and I hope Dyota and Kanika can chime into what advice would you give startups to say, okay, how would you differentiate, right? Given that the tools are common and even the data may be common, how do you differentiate? How do you create IP that is unique to you that is hard for other people to replicate?
Well, I'll try and separate the problem in two things, right? If you are in a space where there's data is common and maybe there's very little IP to create out of data or the algorithms that you're using, right? Then I think your speed and the execution and the manner in which you deliver your platform is very critical. If you're in a space like us, which is there's very little data for you to build on, it's not very easy, it's not very available, and you're dealing with legacy of 30, 40 years where you go in and connect up to, then your problem definition is very different, and you're really looking to build on what you have. So there are two broad areas that we see. And within both, your strategies will be very different. In an area where everything is available, data is available, I think speed, execution, the way you're thinking through, and how simply you build is very valuable, and price, of course, and skill. In the area where we are in, or where the data is not available, and you've got to go and create all of it and then build on top of it and make it more valuable and deal with legacy, then it's all about expertise. It's about deep understanding of that marketplace. It's about how you build the marketplace and how you then eventually become the marketplace, right? So those are the two large areas that we have seen. At least I understand, but hopefully there'll be more interesting answers.
Dyota, Kanika?
Yeah, maybe I would just add is that, the data may be common and the base frameworks may be common, but it really comes down to what is the problem you're solving and how well you can solve for it. I think we're in a space where for any founder, you will find that there are different people trying to solve similar problems. So for you to be able to create value, you have to pick a problem and solve it really well. And that's where there are questions around, the quality of your data set, the quality of the technology team that you're using. Do they have prior experience? And, like Ravi said, how fast you can get to a solution which really works and which has benefit to your customer. Because if your customer is willing to pay for it, then there is inherent value in what you're building.
Okay, if I may add, the Growth Fund has recently invested in a company called Tyrannis, which has been before that invested by our sister fund in Israel. And what they solve is a problem of agriculture. How do you on a very massive scale diagnose the plant health? And of course, you can do it by satellite, and that's generally available. I think that's the question that was asked. But what this company did was they developed their own technology to go acquire data that is proprietary to themselves, because they can take picture at a very high speed and at a high resolution. And they create a set of data that's proprietary to themselves that's very hard to replicate. So there are ways to get to data, and you just have to be very smart in creating that. Okay, I have a next question from also from the audience, and this is directed at Ravi. And the question is, I think is and again, I'm going to paraphrase and maybe broaden it, yeah? And the question is more about, Ravi, you talk about your 90% accuracy, that leaves 7%, right? And how do you protect yourself from not becoming a problem that will cripple you and then maybe your customer? right? I think this is the question about the cause of failure. But I think if you broaden it, is how do you anticipate and how do you resolve the problems of edge cases? Yeah, that's a more general question. Yeah.
I think the first point that we have learned also is that we can't solve 100% right now. We don't have the tooling, and it's going to be a very costly problem to solve. So we set the expectations. I think the most important is the first is to set the expectations of what we're going to get out of here. And so expecting that 95%, 93% is something that is going to work is, for the customer. Second thing is how gracefully you fall or hand off from there, right? There is very clear approach to say that you're dealing with an AI tool here, or you're dealing with something which is trying to understand what you're saying. It may not have understood it. And so the willingness of the AI programming to allow that, confession is very important. Right? So you're making the confession upfront to the customer that you're dealing with something which is learning, which is not always right, and which is going to have a long way to go, is the first acceptance. And from there on, you take every step from there. Second is that within the financial services, when we started, we were at 60%, mind you. Today, we are able to get to 93. Right? It's a 4-year journey. And now every 1% from here is becoming incredibly tougher. But there are people who are doing things in a different way in the market, solving problems differently. So we built a collaborative framework now where we can use some of those algorithms and learn, right? When we started, it was a different journey. So being open to bring in better solutions, collaboratively on a real-time conversation or problem solving, and create an open architecture for your client allows the clients to believe that you will take them and, allow the client to walk with you on a path to open acceptance of AI and a collaborative framework. So we're creating those. Rather than saying, trust my AI only, we're saying we will participate and get better solutions and find a more accurate path on real-time basis, right? So we are doing all of that. So that's the path we've taken so far. It's a journey. There are no real answers here right now. We're still very nascent in this business.
Thank you for that. And I think another audience was want to ask a follow-up question to that. And I think you have created a collaborative framework and a trust conversation with your customer. The follow-up question is, how do you convince your customers that the answers that the outputs from your AI, your engine, is correct and is the right answer?
It is very, very challenging in the financial service industry. So you need to have your tooling done in a way in which you can explain the model. You can explain the model's impact on the data. You can explain the model's impact on testing. So you have to have the explainability demonstratable, testable by so many people in the bank. It starts with the teller, it goes up to the chief risk officer, it goes to the regulator, and it's audited, documented, and seen. Sometimes the same thing behaves differently for two people. Now, it's very difficult unless you really drill down to understand why is it not so. So building these explainable models is one of the biggest challenges of building an AI company. So I would say that is the moat, alongside data and understanding the problem statement. Explain what you did, right? And that is why when you use AI from APIs, which are available, maybe performing great, you really can't explain it to your clients. How did you use it? And that is why some companies like us build a lot of what we use, because we can explain that a little bit. May not be fully, but to some extent, yes.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to pull back a bit and then ask more general questions, and then I'll invite the other speakers to chime in as well. There's a survey that was done in Europe about startups that call themselves AI, but actually what the survey found was that 40% of the startups claim to use AI, but actually they don't. The question I have, and it's a series of questions. First question is to Kanika and Dyota is, do we see that? So that was a survey in UK. Do we see that in our part of the world? Right. That's the first part. And the second part is, what advice would you give startups that are going to this space? What advice would you give them such that when they talk to either customers or when they talk to investors, they do not come across as either customer marketing, which they do, or investor marketing, right? And how do they do that? How would they do that so that they don't commit these sins? And then how would they manage it such that they don't lose credibility either to customer or to investors? So 3 questions, and feel free to jump in, anyone in any sequence.
Yeah, if I can take a first stab at that, right? So if that survey was done in Southeast Asia, I think the outcome will be relatively similar. I think there was a time a few months or even a few years back where AI was like the flavor of the month or the flavor of the quarter, where all the startups we meet had an element of AI. So I understand that it's a tool that you may use, right? And it could be that it's something that you do very well. So like knowing the fact that everyone else will try to kind of position them as an AI company or say that they have AI capabilities, the easiest thing that founders and teams can do is, first of all, like lose all the jargon, right? So explain it to us in plain English, because one of the things that we see is that if you don't understand something well enough, then you would fall back on jargon, right? So if you explain it to us in very simple terms, in human language, if like I want to call it, then that's like the first good step, right? Now, the second thing is also like, okay, once you've done that, once you present it in human language, explain to us like how you built your AI, like what the AI does, right? So explain to us, like Kanika and Ravi pointed out earlier, what kind of data advantages do you have? Do you have a data advantage, right? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. Maybe it's how you label your data that creates an advantage. Like highlight your team's capabilities and experience, right? So does your team have this experience before? Do they have the capability to solve for that problem, right? And last but not least, if let's say you already are working on a live product, then show us output, like show us like how accurate your AI is, right? As Ravi pointed out, if you have like good customer referrals, if you have data to back up your claim, that'll be very useful for us to kind of like read through, understand, and evaluate. But the point is, if you want to differentiate yourself, is use very simple English, throw out all the jargon, explain what you do simply, explain your advantages, data or capability wise, explain the tools that you're using. And I think if you do that, then you'll have a better bet for us to truly understand what problems you're solving for and believe you. I don't know, Kanika or Ravi, you have something to add?
No, that's very nicely put from you. I have nothing to add. Over to Kanika.
Okay,
Yeah,
go ahead, Kanika. Okay.
No, I was saying that was a good answer, so nothing to
Okay, all right, okay, good. Again, this is a question from the audience, and I'm going to broaden it as well. I think the question is very topical. COVID, and I think the question, one of the questions was how was AI used in helping the effort in combating COVID. But I'm going to generalize it, and maybe again this is maybe for Ravi. How has COVID helped you? Is it good for you? And do you see that there's a sustaining positive impact to COVID?
Right. It's been unprecedented as an event, and it's been unprecedented in our life that we have customers calling us and saying, listen, how can you do this in 2 days, 3 days, 4 days? So the demand has been fairly large, but having said that, we deal with financial institutions. The CEO may want it in 2 days, but the entire organization to get it moving takes 180 days. But yes, the demand is phenomenal right now. Largely so because everybody has to find a way to help their customers. And more so in financial services, with your branches being shut down, your call centers being shut down, how do you get your customers to, get to what they want to do, and most importantly, money, because that's where it is. And app discovery and all of those are massive challenges. A lot of the world, it actually exposed banking in a lot of sense, that a lot of the world believe that apps will solve everything that's there in digital and financial services, especially in banking. Suddenly, you come to realize that 80% of your customer base doesn't use apps, have not used your app. They don't know where your app is. They have never tried it before. So even if 10% of that starts using your entire app store, everything crashes. So you have to find ways to distribute it and make it more available to your customers to access it anywhere from Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp, unstructured interfaces, automated call centers. So you have voice is a very big shift. So all this has happened in the last 6 months at very rapid pace. And the next 24 months, I think it's just going to go crazy, because this problem can repeat itself. It may not go, and everybody does not want to be caught again in the same foot. So it is accelerated change, but remember, we are dealing with technology which is 15 to 20 years old in any institution. So it takes them still 6 months to get through the door. Some parts can be done in 6 days. 90% of the work will take 6 months. That is the fact of the matter, but everybody is pushing for it.
So that's good. It sounded like you have work cut off for you for the next 2 years.
I haven't had time for a haircut, as you can see. You know that going through.
It looks good on you. It looks good on you, Ravi. Okay. There is a question of how VCs look at startups, but we have an answer for that. So please hold. We'll come to that. I have one question is, Ravi, you talk about a lot of competition, and actually a lot of the competition is coming from the big guys, right? The Google, the Amazon, and Facebook, and then that's on in the West, and in the East you have the Baidu, Tencent, and Alibaba. The question is, how do you avoid being the kill zone of the big guys?
Until they discover you and they figure out that you're doing something, so you lay low. I lay very low. You wouldn't have seen us, heard us, nothing. So that's the first rule. And we do our job very quietly. 2, we focus on the guys who are going to be most impacted. And we do very strategic works for our banks, because we know the pain point, because they're all going head on. All these companies that you mentioned have aspirations to unbundle financial services, and most importantly, unbundle banking. And they're already doing it without licensing. Our job is to make banks who are incumbents look as good and better than these guys. And the only way we can win that battle is with data. And I can tell you today, we are champions of that data, and our banks love that data. We can do better than the big boys because we've done a lot of work. We understand the industry, and we are regulatory compliant. So we make sure those moats stick. We define our moats. Yes, we're constantly challenged by how it moves, but we also created a collaborative framework. So we do work with the Microsofts, the Amazons, the Googles of the world to enable our customers do better for their customers. So we created that ecosystem very fast. So everybody understands the ecosystem well, and we know where the limits of data and what competition is. So we created a cooperative framework for furthering, the end customer experience in a nice way. So it's tough. I can tell you, this is extremely tough. This is a question some of the CEOs ask us ourselves: how are you going to help me there? I don't know, but we try.
Okay, and I pick up another emphasis from you is that data, and it keeps coming back to data, right? So you have something different to offer, you have something proprietary, you differentiate. Okay, so I have the question, and it was mentioned earlier, GPT-3. And again, I'm going to open up to everyone. What is the impact on GPT-3? And the second question is, how do you take advantage of that? Anyone?
Dyota, you want to go?
Okay, I can go. So look, as I pointed out, right? So there's a lot of these new tools and algorithms that are being surfaced. So the question, if you as mentioned in Kanika section, right? If you are a founder, then you determine what tools do you want to use and what tools you want to build. So Ravi built a lot of these tools, but maybe for your use case, for your solution, for your problem, you may want to kind of like leverage what's already available, right? So GPT-3 is not exactly 100% open source, but then like from my understanding, there's a waiting list on it. But like if let's say you figured based on your studies, based on your research, that this can help you bring value to your users or your clients or your customers, then use it as a tool, right? It's super powerful, right? So think about how that piece can fit into the puzzle that is you solving the problem for your customer. That's the way I would look at it, right?
Ravi, you want to add to that? It's very close to your heart.
Yes, I mean, I don't know much of other industries, but I'm very focused, and there's very limited I understand. And that's why our data, I always come back to data and the area. So GPT-3 has a remarkable impact because of the language models and the data it's been trained on phenomenally, right? And the compute behind it and what is already achieved from GPT and 2 and then the 3, and we will see a greater evolution going forward. But in the space that you want to work with, there are probably areas it can help, at least in the financial services, where you do not have confidential data or you do not have data which requires a lot of digging into the backend, right? So there are application areas where you can use GPT-3 fantastically well, maybe just a hi, hello, a conversational layer that can be built. But beyond that, you can use the API, but in financial services, there's all about data privacy, PII data, and all of that. You can't just pass that API and hope all of that will happen. It's not going to happen. Most regulators are very worried about these things. So use it within the framework where you can use it. And I think there will be a great number of options within financial services itself. You can answer a lot of questions. It can be funny. You can have a persona, whatnot. Right? So, but beyond that, I think, yeah, I mean, there are many tools. It's not only GPT-3, many tools which are evolving. So you can use anybody's tool that's there. But specialized areas, it's going to be a little more complex.
Okay. I've just been given the signal that we're coming to our hour, but before we go, I'd like just to introduce one last topic of discussion. I think this will kind of help us pull a lot of things together of what we discussed today. And the last topic of discussion, and actually one of the audience has actually prompted us, is how do VCs evaluate AI startups? And because this is a significant topic, I have actually prompted our panelists to think about it, and they are kind enough to kind of summarize their thoughts into one slide. And it's going to come out now, and I will perhaps invite Kanika to do a quick voiceover and highlight the salient points, and then maybe also then invite Ravi to give a reaction to that. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Chuan. So, won't spend too much time, but essentially, I think as VCs, we would want to evaluate AI startups in two perspectives. So the first one is commercial, and really that is the same for any other startup as well. So we start by understanding the market size or the size of the problem. We would want to understand, is AI really the best way to solve this problem? And that goes back to data. It goes back to what's the existing technology available, and then go on to understanding the team, the right to win in this market, what's the business model, what's the competition, and how far away the product is to commercialization. The second aspect, which is more unique to AI, is to really understand the different building blocks of an AI solution. And I would say the starting point again is data availability, whether you're generating it or whether you're accessing it from someplace. So to understand where the startup is getting data from and how proprietary is the data set. So can some other startup come and actually replicate this solution because this data is easily available to a lot of people? We would also want to understand what is the underlying level of advancement of the core algorithms being used. We would want to understand who is the tech team which is building the solution, what is their prior experience, and lastly, if there are any deployment issues we need to solve for at a later date. I think a couple of things which often get missed out is that not all investors understand AI equally, so it's important to choose the right partner in your journey. Similarly, not all founding teams understand AI equally. So if there is a gap, it's important for founders to acknowledge it and hire for it. Competition in this space is usually global. So when we look at AI startups, we look at scalability across multiple countries. So it's important to understand who else is trying to build something similar. And to keep in mind that as VCs, we make commercial decisions. So the commercial aspect becomes pretty important and should not be forgotten. And lastly, I would say, and something which Ravi also brought up earlier, is that AI is a bit unique because your business model is not pure software and it's not pure service. So there are elements of a software solution, and then there are elements of customization and services which you need to give to your client. And both these elements need to be built out. So from a scale perspective, this is also something we would evaluate in AI startups.
Thanks, Kanika.
Anything
Ravi?
you'd like to add from your experience?
Oh, this is very consistent with my experience with Vertex itself, to be honest. I didn't know we were going to go into this one. But yeah, I mean, I think some of the few early questions that Vertex had for us when we were meeting was, why do you believe this will work? We didn't have too many answers. We said, we have a customer who's willing to pay. So that's the first proof point that we believe this will work. We think the customer has a challenge, and the customer spelled out the challenge. We had proof points of customers who were willing to buy. We never knew it would get too big, this big. The market we knew was going to be large, but not so fast. I think a lot of things changed. We thought we could solve the problem through just software. We realized later on that service is a big part of this. And this is true for most of the industry that you're trying to address, across most industries. We bet on data. And I think I keep going back to that. We bet on our data and a knowledge base of that data. You can have a lot of data, but if you don't understand what the data means and how you can use the data, you're not going to win. Let's be very clear about it. So we bet on that very strongly. And I think, which is true for most VC conversations, they really want to understand, what data do you have? How does the data look? What do you make of the data? And how can you monetize that data? If you can answer those questions, I think you have understood your business problem fairly well. Right? So yeah, these are questions Vertex always asks us in every meeting. So we're getting better at it. It's helped us improve. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Ravi, and thank you, Kanika and Dyota, and most of all, thank you the audience, and thank you for spending an hour with us. We obviously are up to our hour, and we have to bring this to a close. And before I end, I just want to highlight that next week there's another session. It's at a slightly different time. It's not at 4 like today, but it's at 1 p.m. And the topic is leveraging the power of cloud services. And we hope that you'll be able to join us. Thank you for spending the hour with us.
Thank you, everyone. Good day.
Okay,
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.